E-ink tablets have been getting more attention along with a push for more development and improvement. And looking at these e-paper displays, you can see why.
E-ink, the Kleenex of electrophoretic displays.
Cloud Note Mini, $289 at Amazon, available right now.
E-ink has come a long way, from the earliest e-readers of the aughts to a huge array of devices in every major category.
It's more comfortable to look at, something that reflects light as opposed to emitting it. This can really help with eye strain and give you a dramatically better visibility outside. There are a good number of these tablets out there right now, but some started to wonder what a phone experience with this type of screen would be like. Bigme decided to take a crack at it and develop their first Android e-ink phone. Now, Hisense made a few of them in the past, but they were much more expensive and had much lower end hardware. Bigme's main competitor is the company Books, and Books made the Palma, which was more expensive but generally well received. Although it wasn't even a phone. It was a phone shape, but it had no SIM card reader. This device is truly a phone with a micro SIM port and 4G support. Now, when I heard about it, it was under pre-order with two different options: a black and white screen for $219 or a color screen for $249. And it appears they only made about 1,000 of each for the first batch, which led me to a hypothesis that I'll get to later. Now, I really wanted to see what a color e-ink display would look like in person, so I ordered that one. Now, I've been playing around with it for a few months now and have been carefully deciding how I feel about it. Because on one hand, I really want to love it so badly, and I can see the immense potential, but there are a few decisions inside it that really hold it back for me. Let's start with the screen. I already said that an e-ink screen or e-paper screen is known for being much easier to look at and easy on the eyes, but the advantages don't stop there. E-ink is also very energy efficient. It only uses power when it refreshes the screen, and that image will be retained on the screen even if the device is powered off. That's because e-ink is a unique digital analog hybrid. The screen uses these charged particles that get rearranged to create an image when given an electric signal. Think of it kind of like a super fast Etch-a-Sketch. Now, the color versions of these screens have only been around for a couple of years now, and add a little bit of a complication. Since the screens can only have one particle move back and forth at once, they have to layer these screens and create sort of grid lines of these RGB particles in order to create that image. It's pretty complex, but an excellent video to watch to explain all this would be Posey's video on it. It's an incredible watch, and it's fun and entertaining, even just looking at the marvel of how he filmed the thing. So long story short, having a color screen creates a little bit less resolution because it has to split those layers up a little bit further. The black layer will still keep its higher resolution, but any color will be displayed at a lower resolution, so it sort of complicates the results. On a larger device, this image has more room to breathe and will look better than something displayed on a small screen like a phone. So unless you absolutely need color, I would recommend sticking to the black and white version over this one for just better readability. Because in most cases, that's what you want this for, right? Reading? Or so you would think. Say you're an avid reader. Most book apps will have a page-turning feature which works great on e-ink displays because then it will only have to refresh once per turn. Most phones are designed to scroll while reading, and scrolling on e-ink is a little rough. There are some settings to change and adapt the screen refresh rates and optimize for different use cases, and that's all accessed through a nifty little pull-down menu. Default is generally balanced experience for most apps and use cases. There is a manga and comic view which take much longer to arrange the particles to give you a better, clearer image with more fidelity, but the cost is a much lower refresh rate as well as a lot of blinking and flashing. Watching videos is possible and certainly trippy. Right now I have the setting maxed out to the best possible refresh rate, where it uses the GPU to make efficiency decisions on which particles need to be replaced at any given point to make everything go as fast as possible. It's incredible when you think about how this technology works, and that it even works at all for video. And it gives me this sort of retro late 90s look to the video quality. That got me thinking, what would gaming look like on this? Well, to answer that question, I had to bring my childhood back with some Game Boy Advance emulation. And in a way, it felt almost like a truer experience to the original non-backlit Game Boy Advance screen. That's not to say that there isn't a backlight. There is, but it never makes a screen look better. It's only there for when there is no physical light to be able to hit your screen, which I do think is a necessity, but for most of the day, I just leave it off. So if this isn't mainly for reading, and it isn't an ideal use case, then who is it for, really? Now, from what I gathered online, most of the people interested in this phone were people trying to cut back on their digital lives, or to some extent, digital minimalism. But the phone needs a lot of help to be able to meet that requirement, which seems almost ironic. Typically, a digital minimalist will want to be able to get rid of all unnecessary apps and have just the ones that they want on the home screen. But out of the box, this has very little customization options. And a few of the pre-installed apps can't be removed at all from the home screen, taking up space that most people would want clear. It'd be one thing if you could hide the apps, but you can't even do that. Not without installing a custom launcher like Nova. But that already steps outside of a lot of people's comfort zone. I don't think that most minimalists would want to have to do a whole bunch of tinkering with their phone before they could get it just right. Maybe some do, but I mean, I guess you could root the phone and probably do a whole lot more with it. And a lot of people who are interested in projects like that are tech guys who might be more interested in high-end hardware rather than something with anemic specs like this. I think what Bigme needs to do is update their OS to be able to hide apps or even delete the stock apps that they pre-installed and give you the option for maybe some monochromatic icons. Because I think that would really help the aesthetics of this experience. Resizing app icons to be larger would also be nice. But I do think they already know this. Because a lot of the decisions I've seen so far lead me to believe that this was more of a prototype test. It was created in a pretty small batch, and they kept the price down on the parts as much as possible to produce a phone with enough polarizations to be able to get an accurate idea of what people actually do want out of a phone like this. Because there is demand for it. I think they just want to be able to understand where to direct their efforts for the next phone, which apparently is already in development with a more current version of Android. And I think that's pretty smart. $150 for a phone is already a really low price. So most who bought it out of curiosity rather than to be dependent on it. It's really hard to wrap up my thoughts on this in a cohesive manner. Almost every high or low point has an asterisk with a however. For example, this phone only supports 4G GSM networks. However, most things you would need 5G for would be for something like video streaming or better game connectivity. Things that require that broader band connection. But with this type of screen, video watching will definitely not be your priority, or really any online gaming for that matter. Not to mention that 5G has a greater pull on your battery. So 4G does make a good bit of sense. It has a front and back camera. However, it won't be winning any awards. However, it is just a $250 phone. Things like document scanning are probably more of what it's intended for, or just taking pictures when you're in a pinch. How about the 128 gigabyte storage space on a relatively cheap phone? Now that sounds great, right? But what are you storing on this phone? You likely aren't going to be taking a lot of pictures or looking at them or watching or storing your videos for that matter. Ebooks barely take any space. So what do you need that much storage for? Especially if things seemed a little more geared towards minimalists. Maybe a music library? I'm not sure. But this phone doesn't even come with a headphone jack. So it's not really going to be pulling in the old analog earphone crowd that want to use this as like some sort of retro futuristic iPod. It also has an SD card slot, which, pointing to my previous thoughts, make me wonder why they focused on that over something arguably more important like waterproofing. There is zero waterproofing or any certification for that matter on this phone, which might be the hardest pill to swallow. Now, what about the battery life? Well, we already mentioned how good e-ink is on a battery, but with this I quickly learned that it's only part of the picture. I ran a test where I shut off all wireless communication and left the screensaver on, which I forgot to mention I really do like because it's this nice clock with a calendar combo that looks really nice. If they do more with this type of aesthetic for the rest of the phone, I think they would really go somewhere. Anyway, I left this screen on for a week straight before it drained the battery completely. Now that's one screen refresh every minute or so, at least a partial screen refresh for when the minute on the clock change. That's pretty good. But when you turn Wi-Fi and data connection on and have Google Play services playing in the background doing all the updates to apps and reporting on your activity, you get really just about a day or two tops. Maybe more if you stretch it out a little bit and decide to turn certain features on or off to conserve battery, but it's important to know just how much those things affect your battery life. So it's not like it's going to be this huge improvement just for that, unless you really do use those things minimally. Now, the big thing that stops me from daily driving it is that there was no support for Android Auto whatsoever, and I have to drive to a lot of unfamiliar locations regularly, so that would be a pretty huge deal breaker for me. Maybe with some routing I can get it to work, but yeah, it's a real bummer. So I have to ask the question again. Who exactly is this phone for? Who would benefit most from it in its current state? The easiest answer is anyone who spends most of their day outside in direct sunlight. If your job or activities require maximum viewability of a screen in direct sunlight all day, there is no better phone for this. I've already seen some reviews from bikers who use this as their mounted navigation on their handlebars. I could see hikers taking advantage of this for long backpacking trips and having all of their maps loaded on it. As long as all the map data is there, all you need to use is your GPS, and you can even turn off data services off, and this thing could last for a super long time in the outdoors. Again, the great however with this is, of course, the case of lack of water resistance, something that is probably needed outdoors. But really, this phone was for Bigme. It was for them. This was a benchmark phone, I think, to measure all the pain points that matter to people. So the rest of my comments will be directly for Bigme. Stock Android home screens don't look great on e-ink. So lean into that minimal aesthetic with some monochromatic icon skins and make the icons more resizable. If you insist on apps that are unremovable, at least give the option to hide them in the app drawer instead of being stuck with them on the home screen. Now, this may be a given once you run later versions of Android, but Android Auto needs to be there. For future backlights, dual tone between warm and cool hues would also be appreciated. If you can only do one, please make it like 5,000 Kelvin, more of a daylight temperature. I know that IP certification is expensive, but at least some sort of water resistance assurance would greatly increase confidence in buying those phones in the future. OnePlus used to skip the IP ratings, but added gaskets regardless. So anything is better than nothing. I think you have huge opportunities with shaking things up with the screen. For one, don't be afraid of shaking the tradition to provide wider horizontal ratios. If the intentions are for people to read more on these screens, it needs to be a little bit wider to be more comfortable, which would open up the way for something I think that would be truly game-changing for most people: stylus support. Note-taking on an e-ink phone would be incredible. If you had that wider screen, you could probably have the space to store a stylus internally, kind of like how the Samsung Note or LG Stylo did. On traditional phones, there was limited demand for that, but I don't think that would be the case with what you're already bringing to the table. Be bold. Also, if you introduce a larger battery for your next version, we might be able to see less effect from all those background application drains. If you could add transcription to your recording app, I think that would also be pretty awesome. I see there is something that looks like it's supposed to do that in the VTOT app, but I don't think it works. It hasn't worked for me anyway. Maybe following Google's footsteps with how they've done theirs. I'll say it again. I want to love this phone, but some of the compromises were too great for me to be able to use it daily. We'll have to see what software updates they provide, and they already have updated a few things, and what revisions with the hardware they make in the future. And when I get a little more time, I really want to dig in there and see what I can do to customize this to how I want it. If and when I make that video, I'll have it linked to the video at the end of this video to play next. If you're like me and are interested in trying this phone for yourselves, I have the link to it in the description. What are your thoughts on this type of phone so far? Are you bored of regular smartphones and excited to see something a little different? If there was anything you think I missed, comment it below and I'll try to make sure to answer it.